It was 3:07 a.m. when the shrill ring of the 911 dispatcher's phone sliced through the stillness of the night. Tina Ramirez had just settled in for a quiet shift, sipping her lukewarm coffee, when the call came in. 911. What's your emergency? She answered, stifling a yawn. There's a car parked in my asterisk spot, screeched an irate woman on the other end of the line. I need the police here immediately. St. Ramirez blinked in disbelief. Mom, do you realize what time it is? This doesn't sound like an emergency. Of course it's an emergency. The woman shouted. Someone is in my asterisk spot. I pay good money for this spot, and I won't tolerate anyone taking it. Siding set. Ramirez began typing out the details. Okay, Mom, can you give me your address and a description of the vehicle? As the hysterical woman rattled off her address and a play-by-play of the transgression set. Ramirez shook her head in dismay. This was hardly worth the department's time and resources, but protocol demanded she send an officer to investigate. Another night, another emergency call from HOA Karen. Ramirez thought grimly as she dispatched the nearest patrol car. Within minutes, Officer Greg Wilkins pulled up to the address, his cruiser's lights cutting through the darkness. As he approached the imposing wrought iron gates, a petite, middle-aged woman in a silk robe and slippers came bustling out, waving her arms frantically. Officer, thank goodness you're here, she cried. The nerve of that person, just parking in my asterisk spot like they own the place. Officer Wilkins tried to interject, but Karen steamrolled on. I called 911 the moment I saw that car. It's an absolute outrage. I pay good money for this reserved spot, and I won't tolerate anyone taking it. Not even for a minute. Holding up a hand, Officer Wilkins finally managed to get a word in. Mom, I understand you're upset, but this really isn't an emergency. Perhaps we could discuss this with your HOA in the morning. Discuss it? Karen scoffed. The time for discussion is over. This needs to be handled now. That car is illegally parked, and I want it towed immediately. Sensing the futility of reasoning with the irate woman, Officer Wilkins sighed and trudged over to the offending vehicle, a beat-up sedan with an expired registration. He peered inside, then returned to Karen, shaking his head. Mom, I'm sorry, but I can't have this car towed. There's no one in it, and it doesn't appear to be blocking anything. It's just parked in an open space. Karen's face contorted with rage. What do you mean you can't tow it? This is my asterisk spot. She stabbed a bony finger at the ground. It has my name on it. Officer Wilkins held up his hands placatingly. I understand you feel strongly about this, but without a valid reason, I can't have the car removed. I suggest you take this up with your HOA board in the morning. With that, he turned and headed back to his cruiser, leaving a sputtering, red-faced Karen in his wake. The next morning, Karen stormed into the HOA office, her silk robe billowing behind her. The sleepy-eyed receptionist barely had time to greet her before she was accosted. Where is the HOA president? Karen demanded. I need to speak with him immediately. The receptionist blinked in surprise. Oh, Mr. Johnson is in his office, but... Well, don't just stand there. Karen snapped. Announce me at once. Flustered, the receptionist hurried to the president's office and timidly poked her head in. Mrs. Wilkins is here to see you, sir. She says it's urgent. Mr. Johnson, a kindly older gentleman with a shock of white hair, looked up from his computer with a sigh. Very well, send her in. Moments later, Karen burst through the door, her face flushed with indignation. Mr. Johnson, I've had the most outrageous experience, and I demand that you take action. Mr. Johnson held up a hand. Slow down, Karen. What seems to be the problem? The problem? Karen scoffed. The problem is that some inconsiderate fool parked in my asterisk spot last night. I called the police, but that useless officer refused to have the car towed. Mr. Johnson frowned. Karen, you know the HOA rules. Those spots are for residents, not assigned to specific individuals. Not assigned. Karen spluttered. but I've been parking in that spot for years. It has my name on it. That doesn't make it your personal property," Mr. Johnson said firmly. "The spots are meant to be shared by all residents." Karen's eyes narrowed. "So you're saying I have no recourse? That I just have to accept some asterisk criminal asterisk taking what's rightfully mine?" Mr. Johnson sighed heavily. "I understand you're upset, but there's no need for such dramatic language. If there's a problem with parking, we can discuss it at the next board meeting and see if we can find a solution." "A solution?" Karen's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "The solution is to tow that car immediately. It's parked in asterisk my asterisk spot, and I won't stand for it. Mrs. Wilkins, I'm afraid I can't authorize the towing of a legally parked vehicle simply because you feel entitled to that spot," Mr. Johnson said sternly. "Perhaps we could look into reserved spots for residents, but for now, the spaces are open to all." Karen's face contorted with fury. "This is an outrage. I pay my HOA fees, and I demand to be treated with respect. If you won't do anything about this, then I'll take matters into my own hands." With that, she stormed out of the office, leaving a bemused Mr. Johnson in her wake. That night, Karen lay awake, seething with resentment. The nerve of that officer, refusing to tow the car from her spot. And the audacity of Mr. Johnson, dismissing her concerns as if they were nothing. Well, she wasn't about to let this stand. Her spot was rightfully hers, and she would do whatever it took to reclaim it. As the clock struck midnight, Karen slipped out of bed, pulling on a dark hoodie and a pair of gloves. Carefully, she crept downstairs and out the front door, making her way to the vehicle that had so brazenly usurped her parking space. With a quick glance around to ensure no one was watching, Karen reached into her purse and pulled out a slim metal tool. Kneeling beside the car, she set to work on the lock, her fingers deftly manipulating the pick. After a few tense moments, the lock gave way with a satisfying click. Karen grinned, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was really doing this. She was taking back what was rightfully hers. Wasting no time, she slipped into the driver's seat and fired up the engine. The car rumbled to life, and Karen quickly maneuvered it out of the spot, parking it a few spaces down. With a smug smile, she hopped out and hurried back to her own car, neatly sliding into the now vacant space. Asterisk, they'll teach that inconsiderate hooligan a lesson. Asterisk, she thought triumphantly. Asterisk, no one messes with Karen Wilkins and gets away with it. Asterisk. Little did she know, her midnight escapade had not gone entirely unnoticed. As she crept back into her house, a pair of watchful eyes followed her every move, and a phone was quietly dialed. The next morning, Karen awoke feeling refreshed and vindicated. She hummed happily as she made her way to the kitchen, already planning how she would gloat to Mr. Johnson about her victory. But her good mood was short-lived when a loud pounding came at the front door. Frowning, she opened it to find a stern-faced police officer standing on her doorstep. "Mom, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to come with me," the officer said, his tone brooking no argument. Karen's eyes widened in alarm. "What? Why? What have I done?" "We've received a report of a vehicle theft," the officer replied, his gaze unwavering. "The owner claims you moved their car from its parking spot last night." As the reality of the situation dawned on her, Karen's heart sank. Her daring midnight maneuver had backfired. Sitting in the back of the police cruiser, Karen's mind raced with a mixture of fear and indignation. Asterisk, how dare they accuse me of theft? Didn't they understand that it was my spot? Asterisk. When they arrived at the station, the officer escorted her to a small interrogation room, where a stern-faced detective was waiting. "Mrs. Wilkins, I'm Detective Parsons. Please have a seat," the detective said, gesturing to the metal chair across the table. Karen perched on the edge of the seat, her posture rigid. "Detective, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I did not steal any car. I was simply reclaiming my rightful parking spot." Detective Parsons raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Your rightful spot? I'm afraid I don't follow." Launching into an impassioned explanation, Karen laid out the entire saga, from the midnight intruder to her confrontation with Mr. Johnson. "That spot is mine by right," she concluded, her eyes blazing. I paid good money for it, and I won't tolerate some criminal taking what's rightfully mine. The detective listened impassively, taking notes. I see. And so you decided to take the law into your own hands and move the car yourself? Karen nodded firmly. Exactly. The police and the HOA refused to do anything, so I had no choice but to rectify the situation myself. Detective Parsons sighed. Mrs. Wilkins, I'm afraid that doesn't justify breaking the law. Moving a vehicle without the owner's consent is considered theft, regardless of your personal feelings about the parking spot. Theft, Karen sputtered, her face reddening. How dare you? I was simply reclaiming what was mine. That's not how the law sees it, the detective said, his tone broking no argument. The owner of the vehicle has pressed charges, and we have you on video surveillance moving the car. I'm afraid you're going to have to come with me. Karen's eyes widened in horror as the detective rose from his seat and moved to cuff her wrists. No, you can't do this, she cried. This is an outrage. I demand to speak to a lawyer. But her protests fell on deaf ears as Detective Parsons led her out of the room, the reality of her situation sinking in. Her misguided attempt to assert her rights had landed her in serious trouble, and she could only hope that a lawyer could help her avoid the dire consequences of her actions. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity for Karen. After her arrest, she had been released on bail, but the weight of the charges against her hung heavy on her mind. Determined to fight the accusations, Karen had hired a seasoned criminal defense attorney, Olivia Raines. The sharp-witted lawyer had taken one look at the case and immediately set to work. This is a classic case of overreach by the authorities, Olivia told Karen during their first meeting. They're trying to make an example out of you, but we can use that to our advantage. Karen fidgeted anxiously in her chair. So you think you can get the charges dropped? Olivia gave her a reassuring smile. I'm confident we can at least get the charges reduced. The key is to paint you as a well-meaning but misguided homeowner who was simply trying to protect her property. Nodding, Karen leaned forward. Exactly. That's all I was trying to do. The spot is rightfully mine, and I had no choice but to take action when the authorities refused to help. Olivia held up a hand. I understand your perspective, Karen, but the law doesn't see it that way. We need to convince the judge and jury that your actions, while misguided, were not malicious or criminal in nature. Karen frowned. But how can we do that? The evidence clearly shows I moved the car. That's where we'll focus our defense. Olivia explained. We'll argue that you genuinely believed the spot was yours, and that you acted out of a sincere belief that you were within your rights. She'll highlight your lack of a criminal record and your deep ties to the community. Relieved, Karen nodded. Okay, I think I can work with that. But what about the video footage? Won't that be damning? Olivia waved a dismissive hand. We'll challenge the admissibility of that evidence. There are all sorts of technicalities we can use to cast doubt on its validity. As the trial date approached, Karen grew increasingly anxious, but Olivia remained steadfast in her confidence. We've got a strong case, Karen, she assured her client. Just trust the process, and we'll get you through this. On the day of the trial, Karen sat in the packed courtroom, her heart pounding in her chest, as Olivia delivered her opening statement. Painting Karen as a well-meaning but misguided homeowner, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this won't be as bad as I feared. Karen thought, her grip tightening on the edge of the wooden bench. The trial was a drawn-out affair, with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence. Olivia Raines proved to be a skilled and tenacious advocate, skillfully poking holes in the prosecution's case and emphasizing Karen's lack of criminal intent. The video footage of Karen moving the car was a key piece of evidence, but Olivia challenged its admissibility, arguing that the chain of custody had been broken and that the footage could have been tampered with. The judge seemed skeptical of the defense's claims, but ultimately allowed the footage to be presented. Karen took the stand in her own defense, tearfully recounting her story and pleading with the jury to understand her perspective. She painted a picture of a diligent homeowner who had simply been trying to protect what she believed was rightfully hers, and that her actions were born out of frustration with the unresponsive HOA and police department. The prosecution, however, painted a very different picture. They argued that Karen's actions were a clear case of theft and vandalism, and that she had no right to take the law into her own hands, regardless of her personal beliefs. They highlighted the potential safety and liability issues that could arise from such vigilant behavior. As the closing arguments drew to a close, the jury retired to deliberate. Karen sat nervously in the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. As the minutes ticked by, Olivia tried to reassure her, but the uncertainty was palpable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury returned with their verdict. Karen held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears. On the charge of vehicle theft, we find the defendant, Karen Wilkins, not guilty. The collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, and Karen felt a wave of relief wash over her. Olivia gave her a triumphant smile, squeezing her hand reassuringly. However, the jury foreman continued, on the charge of criminal trespass, we find the defendant guilty. Karen's face fell, and she turned to Olivia with a look of anguish. But I didn't trespass. That was my spot. Olivia gave her a sympathetic look. I know, Karen, but the jury didn't see it that way. The good news is that the theft charge was dropped. This could have been much worse. As the judge pronounced Karen's sentence of fine and probation, she sat in stunned silence, her dreams of vindication shattered. The system had failed her, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. In the weeks following the trial, Karen struggled to come to terms with the verdict. While she was relieved to have avoided the more serious charge of vehicle theft, the conviction for criminal trespass still stung. Asterisk, it's not fair, asterisk, she would fume to herself, pacing the floor of her home. Asterisk, that was my spot, and I had every right to reclaim it. Asterisk. Olivia had tried to console her, explaining that the jury likely saw her actions as no overreaction, even if they understood her perspective. But Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she had been wronged by the justice system. To make matters worse, the fallout from the trial had taken a toll on her standing in the community. Neighbors who had once been friendly now eyed her warily, whispering behind her back. Even the members of the HOA board, whom she had once considered allies, now seemed to distance themselves from her. It's all that meddling Mr. Johnson's fault. Karen would rant to her husband, John, who listened with a weary expression. If he had just let me have my way, none of this would have happened. John, a mild-mannered man who preferred to avoid confrontation, would gently try to reason with his wife. Karen, dear, you can't keep blaming everyone else. You made a mistake, and now you have to face the consequences. But Karen was having none of it. In her mind, she was the victim, a noble crusader who had been unfairly maligned by a corrupt system, and she was determined to fight back. Fueled by her sense of righteous indignation, Karen began a campaign of harassment against the HOA and its members. She flooded their inboxes with angry emails, showed up at their meetings to disrupt proceedings, and even tried to organize a recall effort against Mr. Johnson. The more pushback she faced, the more entrenched she became in her belief that she was in the right. And as her obsession grew, her relationships with friends and family began to deteriorate, leaving her increasingly isolated and alone. As the months passed, Karen's crusade against the HOA and its members only intensified. She had become consumed by her need for vindication, her once manageable frustration morphing into an all-consuming obsession. Her husband, John, tried in vain to reason with her, urging her to let it go and move on with her life. But Karen refused to listen, convinced that if she just kept fighting, she would eventually be proven right. The final straw came one night when Karen, in a fit of rage, showed up at Mr. Johnson's home, banging on his door and demanding that he resign from the HOA board. The shaken older man called the police, and Karen was arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace. This time, there was no Olivia Raines to come to her rescue. The judge, clearly exasperated by Karen's continued defiance of the law, sentenced her to 30 days in jail and ordered her to undergo a mental health evaluation. As the guards led her away in handcuffs, Karen's world came crashing down around her. The realization that her stubborn crusade had cost her everything, her freedom, her standing in the community, and even her family's support, hit her like a ton of bricks. In the quiet solitude of her cell, Karen had no choice but to confront the truth. Her actions had been misguided. her sense of entitlement blinding her to the consequences of her behavior. The once proud and unyielding HOA Karen was now a broken, humbled woman, forced to reckon with the price of her uncompromising nature. It would be a long and difficult road to recovery, but as Karen sat in her cell, she vowed to use this experience as a catalyst for change. She would emerge a wiser, more empathetic person, one who understood the importance of compromise and the value of community. And perhaps, one day, she might even be able to forgive herself for the mistakes that had brought her to this low point. But for now, she could only hope that the lessons she had learned would prevent her from ever becoming HOA Karen again.